my honor to welcome you to the newest Being Noahide project. And as you might have guessed from the title of this video, it has something to do with this book called Guide for the Noahide. But before we get into what the project's going to be about, I'd like to introduce you to my on-screen co-hosts. We have Andrew Overhaul, Shane Fox, and Jacob Sharp. And Jacob Sharp is one of the founders of Being Noahide, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the purpose of these videos that we're going to be studying Guide for Noahide. He's going to tell us the purpose of the videos, what the show format is going to be, and then what your job is as a listener. So, Jacob, why don't you share some stuff with us?
Yeah, the purpose of this class will basically be to read and discuss the book Guide for the Noahide, written by our teacher, Rabbi Bar-ron. And this book is really the simplest and most concise introduction to the entire concept of the 7 laws that's currently available. The format of the class will basically be that we will read the entire book from beginning to end, and we will discuss the book as we go, pointing out important things for us to pay attention to, nuances of the text that may not be apparent to first-time readers, and to really focus in on the halachic implications of what we're reading and how to take what this book is teaching and apply it to your everyday life.
Nice. So, what are people's, so in watching the videos, what are they supposed to do with the videos?
Watch the video, read along.
Follow along, read along.
Yeah, and if you have questions, send them in, post them in the comments, send them to us, and we'll try to answer them or bring them up in later classes for everyone's benefit.
Okay. Cool. So let's talk about this book for a second. Guide for the Noahide, a complete manual for living the Noahide laws by Rabbi Michael Shlomo Bar-ron. And I know we got our copy on Amazon.com. You can get your copy there as well, or directly from the publisher at lightcatchersbooks.com. And maybe Jacob and Andy and really all of us can kind of talk a little bit about our relationship with Rabbi Michael, who we fondly refer to as our Mori. You'll hear us talking about him as our Mori throughout these videos. Jacob, Andy, you guys want to start? Talk about Mori, how you met him?
Yeah, I guess I've known Mori Michael since probably around 2003 or 4, and I've been a student of his for about the past 10 or 11 years. Yeah.
Now, did you guys study this book with him, or did you study other stuff with him?
Andy and I have been studying the halakha for B'nai Noach, pretty much specifically from the Mishnah Torah, under our teacher's guidance for the past 10 or 11 years, and actually somewhat before that without their guidance. So it's been definitely an interesting process of learning. Andy?
Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, it's interesting because Jacob and I, we've actually been friends since our youth, along with our friend Shane, and we'd actually come on the path of Torah together long ago when we were in high school, and like many people who may be watching this who came out of the church realizing the pagan origins of Christianity and so forth, until realizing that really the truth was always there with the Torah and is available even for the nations. That there's a path to God, and that one does not have to convert, but can live a full righteous life and have a relationship with God, even as a Gentile, right? And for many years we studied together, studying Torah, but it was really a time about 2003 when friend Jacob had taken a trip to Israel to actually learn how to study Torah. And that itself is quite an interesting story, but through that, he came into the company of who would soon be our rabbi, Rabbi Bar-ron. And through this, we started corresponding with him. And learning through him, our rabbi himself comes from a long tradition of a rabbinic family that actually had a presence in Israel for many generations. And the way that he has studied Torah under the guidance of his own masters is a part of a very ancient Masorah that tries to remain very faithful to Talmudic law, something we'll get into later. But the idea being that when we learn the Torah of Hashem, is not merely to know, but to learn how to do things, right? Because many Noahides coming to the Torah world see the importance of Talmudic study, that is the oral component of studying the Torah, and it's filled with a lot of debates and a lot of opinions. But at the end of the day, is to learn how to fulfill the commandments of the Almighty. And that is all. And with this book, which he graciously consulted with us, very humbling, very grateful for that. This book, Guide for the Noahide, is an introduction, really, for the in-depth study of the details of the commandments, of the 7 laws, that is the halacha. And with Hashem's help, we will do well. Hopefully you will gain something from this and be just as curious and excited to learn more. Hope I didn't go over.
Yeah, I think, so we've actually, Michael in his Saturday Noahide, weekly Noahide class, this is actually one of the first ways he opened that class, was to read and study this book with the Noahides that come to that. And I know before, there's been a few books written about the Noahide laws, but my personal opinion is this is probably the one that explains it really well in a practical manner, as opposed to, I feel some books kind of get a little bit either too fluffy or too, I don't want to say heady, but I don't know how to explain it. But this one was very practical, I found, and very straightforward and concise, and that's kind of what I liked about it. Shane, I know you've known these guys for years. How did you come into this whole Noahide business? Because you and Andy and Jacob have been friends for decades as well.
Yeah, I have a lot to be grateful for in Jacob and Andy, because they sort of forged onward, looking for what was right. I continued an academic career, and in many cases was the constant critic of everything which could come in front of me. Honestly, the two of them kept a steady, rock-like presence in my life, and eventually got me to attend some of Mori Mikhail Shlomo's classes, and that's where my introduction to this starts. And I could have very well ended, but as a sort of agnostic academic who knew there was truth out there, I moved from place to place on a lot of different presented materials. Mori's a little bit different, I think you would all agree. I'm degreed in biology, very well seated in mainstream science, very critical of even his own ideas before presenting them to anyone else. And just in the short 2-3 years, admittedly on very minor points, I've seen he himself appreciate logic presented to him and change a point of his teaching. So, you know, I never had any of the usual fears that somebody was presenting their own agenda. He truly just wants to look for the truth and teach it, in my mind. And that was the first time I'd ever run into somebody like that, who's so extensively steeped in knowledge on both the Torah material and science, which I think if you talk to Maury, you would say there's really no difference between the two.
you. So,
They are both expressions that come from the creator of the universe. Definitely. Expressions of the same thing.
all right, so let's, how about we start getting into the book here a little bit. So this is the lovely cover page. Let's see. Approbations, also known as Haskamahs. So can you guys explain a little bit about what Haskamahs are for books?
Yeah. So in the front of, I know in the Kindle edition it doesn't actually list the Haskamahs for this particular book, but in the printed edition, you'll find a number of basically letters from well-known rabbis. And this is a common thing in the Torah world, where at the beginning of a Torah book, there'll be a number of letters and statements from well-known rabbis, basically giving a approbation or a what's the word?
Endorsement.
An endorsement, yes, that's the word. An endorsement of the book, saying this is a good book, it contains accurate Torah knowledge, you should learn from this. And in the Jewish world, that's a normal thing that people actually look for at the beginning of books. And to not have them is kind of strange.
So I know that you, Jacob, and Andy both have received, you're probably one of the few, if not the only Noahides who have actually received teaching Haskamahs from Mori Michal. What are those, and what are those? For what is teaching Haskamahs typical? Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Well, I could explain a bit. Again, we're talking about the word Haskamah. Okay. Again, the best way to understand this is an authority granting trust to another person to teach law. Now, in the Torah world among Jews, normally this should be distinguished from the rabbinic ordination, which is normally called smicha. Some may have heard that word, in which a Jew has reached a level of scholarship, and the master who taught him is now giving him the authority to teach other Jews and to even decide law. That is not what we have. Haskamah.
Well, there is no such thing for non-Jews.
Right.
That's just purely within the Jewish world. Sort of.
This is something, it's not something that we asked for, but rather our teacher, Rabbi Bar-ron, he has seen how we have advanced in our own learning, and it's not for us to toot our own horn. Again, this is coming from him, and is simply giving us more than permission to teach, which he and his own teacher, Mori Shlomo ben Avraham, have given us permission to teach other Noahides, because it's a very delicate thing to teach the law. God forbid that anyone should make an error. But above that, he has actually given his endorsement to us in the way that we've learned over the years, and he has even learned some things from us in the way that we learn Torah, which is really a healthy relationship between the teacher and student in the Torah world, that a student learns from the teacher, but the student, if he does well, a teacher can even learn a little from him. And that is one way of putting it, but again, to be clear, it has nothing to do with an ordination of authority to judge or any of that, but simply an endorsement of teaching.
Yeah, and I should point out, in the Torah world, it's when you have an actual primary Torah teacher that you learn a large portion of your knowledge from, you are expected to actually go and get their permission before you go and teach others. Before you set yourself up as a teacher, before you go out and start teaching, you're not supposed to do that without your primary teacher's permission. So basically, these Haskamahs that he's given us is like the written permission that he has given us approval to go and be teachers. And I think he's done that largely because within the Noahide world, for someone to even have a primary Torah teacher is unusual, And then for someone to get to the point where their teacher has said, you can go and teach now, is doubly unusual. So.
And we should clarify that the Haskamah he's given individually to you, Jacob, and Andy, personally, long before we even started this project. Yeah. So, but he did also, when we were telling him about what we were thinking of doing this, he did endorse our idea, tell us as a group we can do this. But yeah, the teaching part, that's really on you guys. Me and Shane here, we're just here to ask a bunch of questions and share our thoughts, but it's up to you guys to correct us and share the bulk of the knowledge.
We're all here to study this book together. That's what this video project is about. Yeah.
Well, since anyone now knows about this, it is our hope and our prayer that we do teach correctly. And actually, it is how we begin our studies beforehand. We've always done this. It's traditional in a Beth Midrash or a house of study before entering into a Torah discussion that students will ask for assistance from Hashem in learning, that we make no mistakes in understanding His Torah, His law for us, and that even if we do, we can correct one another with respect. And if someone finds something that we're wrong on, please point it out to us. Note it, do note it into the channel or where you can send comments or requests, because the whole process of Torah is all about unceasing learning.
Absolutely.
Andy, a question here. Would you say that however that opening prayer is done, that there's a specific way to do it for Noahides, or that it must be done?
No. Now, I will tell you this. We learned the original blessing, but it really is more a prayer.
It's a blessing. It's just a prayer.
Right. I mean, the sages had decreed a series of blessings for Jews to utter on this different occasions, some every day and some very special, to remind them of God's presence in our everyday lives, no less with Torah study. And just out of respect, knowing the wisdom of the sages of Israel, we prefer to go according to the formula, which is perfectly fine. It's for brevity's sake that we say the prayer before we started recording, but that's something that's, I don't know, it's very quick. We could share now, or we could just share it later in the written form in the channel.
I think it's well, I think we could probably cover that another time, but it's important to point out that that's not something that's incumbent upon Noahides. It's optional. So right. Yeah. So let's just jump right into the book here. The book is divided into 3 parts, right? Does somebody kind of want to cover this real quick? 3 parts. Introduction to the Noahide Covenant. Covenant of the 7 commands, which will detail the 7 commands, and then laws not included in the 7 commands, which are other, I guess, general principles that govern Torah observance. Exemptions from the Noahide laws. There are cases where the Noahides are exempt from their obligations. We'll get into that. And how you can go beyond the letter of the law. And then some frequently asked questions. And we'll get to the appendix eventually, which is, once we read through this book, that's actually going to be probably a lot of interesting stuff for people. But we're going to first start with the author's preface. And before we jump into this, I think there's a quote on the back of the physical book that I think is kind of important, that kind of really sums up the book and the purpose and what the Noahide life should be about. And I think it's really kind of cool. And where Michael says here, he says, the simplicity of this covenant is striking. It requires no religious ceremonies, no sacrificial service, no priestly hierarchy. It upholds equality between men and women, all races, and all colors. It is the most basic code of human behavior that allows for a world united under the one and only King of the universe. According to the Torah, it is forbidden for non-Jews to create man-made religions. Why add to the simple perfection of Hashem's covenant? The world of the Spirit is as wide to the righteous Noahide as it is to the righteous Jew. One must bear in mind that the very foundation of any relationship with the true God is knowing and fulfilling all the precepts that He has commanded us as Jews, as Noahides. Piety, and I think this is probably like the most important line, piety cannot replace and indeed cannot be reached without this solid foundation, the knowledge of how to precisely follow our 7 laws. So with that, we'll jump into reading. Shane is going to be our reader tonight, and we're all going to jump in and discuss. And the way we do this is we read the kind of the whole paragraph, possibly 2, but mostly 1 paragraph at a time. Stop, talk and discuss, and then continue. Mr. Fox.
Thank you, Abby. I appreciate that. So, as I said, I was very surprised to meet Mori Mikhail Shlomo, so I'm a little bit excited to read this preface, which is mostly his direct commentary about what he's about to teach regarding. So I will get into it. Background and history. At Mount Sinai, Hashem, God, told the nation of Israel through Moses, "And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." As the priesthood of mankind, one of the principal roles of the Jewish people, besides serving as a moral example by adhering to our own covenant with Hashem and maintaining His temple as the center of worship for all peoples, is to actually teach the other nations the laws of God that pertain to them. It is no less an outright commandment to Moses that Israel bring the entire world to the observance of the 7 Noahide laws.
Let me interject a point on this, because I think this is a profound idea that it takes a lot of people a lot of time to really grasp. And he's just stated it very clearly here at the very beginning of this. So we hear a lot that the Jewish people are the chosen people, right? That God chose the Jewish people. But what does this mean? What this means is not that they were chosen and everybody else was rejected, like, I will take this one and the rest of you are garbage. No, no, no. It means that they were chosen to fulfill a specific mission. And what is that mission? That mission was to be a kingdom of priests, to be the Kohanim to the rest of the nations of the world. Not because Hashem hates the rest of the nations of the world, but because God saw that the rest of the nations of Israel had returned to God and had accepted the Torah and were following God. But the rest of the nations weren't there yet. They weren't ready to start following God yet. So God basically set Israel aside and said, okay, I'm going to task you guys to take the Torah, to take my revelation to humanity and guard it, so that when the rest of the nations of the world, when your brothers and sisters finally get to the point where they're ready to follow me, you can then share with them the instructions that I've given for humanity. And that's what it means that Israel is chosen. They were chosen to be the guardians of the Torah and to be our teachers when we finally decide to come and follow Hashem. It's as simple as that. And it's very profound, but it's oft misunderstood.
It seems the implication, too, is that in order for there to be a priestly nation, there should be lay people.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. To have priests, you have to have lay people. Otherwise, who are the priests ministering to?
Yeah.
Listen to me, you rocks and you birds. You do what I say. I'm a priest. No other people around, but I'm a priest.
Yeah, I think in the Torah understanding of what a priest is, may be somewhat different than in other like idolatrous religions. A priest isn't necessarily just someone who like sits in the temple and waves, offerings and does all that stuff. Although that can be part of it too. But the main duty of the Kohanim, from a Torah perspective, is to teach the people.
Cool.
So let's get back to the book. So this book was written purely out of the desire to aid in the fulfillment of that commandment, to help everyone to know and understand the entire Noahide covenant, the Noahide, so he may keep it. And if we could turn the page. Thank you. Accurately, and the Jew that he may teach it accurately.
And
Maybe you finish that. Yeah.
well, actually, let me jump in here, and I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I've got a point to make.
If you have something to say, by all means.
It's an important point that about keeping our covenant and doing it properly and accurately, as he points out here. He's not using these words just randomly, like proper, accurate. Yeah, they sound nice. No, but these are very
superlative.
Yeah. A lot of people look at Judaism who aren't familiar with it, and they look at this sort of as fixation on law and being, precise in the observance of the commandments. And they go, oh yeah, clearly this is a religion for like lawyers and pedantic people, right? Who are like, oh, rules, that's the rules lawyer, that'll be fun. But that's not the point at all. One of the central tenets of Judaism from the Shema is you shall love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, right? So there's a very deep concept, which is that the goal of human existence, the entire purpose for which we are in this world, is to develop a relationship with God, to cling to Him and to draw close to God, right? But how is this done? Do we have to like become great mystical gurus and sit and separate ourselves from the world and meditate and fly around in mystical realms? No, that's not how any of this is done. The way that you draw close to God, the way that you cling to Him, is a very obvious thing that He has revealed to us, and it is through His commandments. The details of the halakha, the details of the laws that God has given us, is the blueprint to how to connect to Him, to how to get to know God. And by essentially the first leg in the journey to drawing close to God is to know what He has commanded you to do in all of its details and to do it. And in the doing of those commandments, they will change your heart. They will change you on the inside and allow you to then connect to God and to draw close to Him. So if you want to draw close to God, the first step, as the sages teach us, is to know the mitzvot and to do them. And the degree to which you don't know them or don't understand the halakha is the degree to which you will be incapable of drawing close to God. And vice versa. The more you know it, the more you understand it, the more the inner meanings of them will open up to you and allow you to draw close to it.
And if I could add a point to this comment on accuracy and the level of detail, I would like to explain this as an iterative process. It doesn't necessarily start day one. To give an analogy, if I need to know a lot about surviving in Arctic weather, I live in Florida, I start out in knowledge knowing that snow is cold, or at least happens when it's cold, and can maybe melt. And basically think of it as a binary condition. If I advance all the way to the level of survival and skill of, let's say, an Inuit tribesman, simply saying there's snow on the ground is completely insufficient. There's fresh snow that leaves tracks. There's snow that gets hit by the sun and melts and then hardens up on the top, leaving a coating of ice. There's snow that hides something. There's all sorts of very detailed variations on snow. The closer you get to it, the more detail is apparent. As with everything, whatever it is we do on a daily basis and learn, we know so much about it that an outside observer will think that perhaps we give too much detail on the subject.
That's actually a really good point. And the sages, as they teach Torah, they actually differentiate between developing like a breadth of knowledge of Torah and developing a depth of knowledge of Torah. They liken the Torah to the ocean, right? It's as broad and as deep as the ocean. But the first thing you need to do really is develop a breadth of knowledge, a breadth of shallow knowledge, like across the entire face of the ocean, so that you understand like just sort of where everything is and get the lay of the land. And then you later, once you've developed that, you go in and develop a depth of knowledge about particular topics and drill in.
And speaking of depth of knowledge, I think our next paragraph goes into where that depth of knowledge has been for all this time on Noahide law.
I have to say, from personal experience, I so from when I was first becoming a Noahide, I was one of those people who were like, okay, I keep the 7. I didn't really know what it meant, and this book wasn't out at the time. But then about a few years ago, something happened, and I realized I had no idea what the laws of theft meant, or what. And what happened was, okay, so I bought this. I went to the candy machine at my work, and I bought this. I always get this bag of Cheetos, and one day I put in the money, I selected for Cheetos, and 2 bags of Cheetos came out, and I had no idea what to do. Now, most people, they would just be like, you know, you know, it's their loss. They should have figured out. You know, they probably factor this into their business costs and stuff like that. But for some reason, that day clicked in my head. I'm like, that's not acceptable to me. It wasn't acceptable to me. I needed to know exactly what Hashem required of me to do. I didn't want to do guesswork with it. And it was at that point that I realized that I really didn't know anything about theft, idolatry. And that's when I started studying with Jacob, because I'm married to him. But yeah, that incident really hit home for me.
I did not resolve knowledge by marrying Jacob. I just want to call that out. Myself and I. In many cases, Abby may be more knowledgeable than I because of that, but I'm not jealous.
Well, it should be pointed out, you guys have known each other for so long, you're effectively brothers. I like to say I married into the family, so. But yeah, I kind of shocked myself with, and then I've had an incident with like a hot chocolate incident, and it's stuff that sounds very, what's the word, innocuous, very mundane, but I don't know, that really bothered me, not knowing exactly what Hashem required. Am I stealing it if I keep the 2nd bag? Am I supposed to return the bag? What am I supposed to do here? It just really bothered me.
I think in all of our learning, because I've had many experiences like that too, where I think I've learned a lot about a particular subject, but then I'll come across a situation which throws it in clear relief that I have no idea what I'm talking about yet, or here's a whole gap in my knowledge of information that I'm like, oh man, I didn't even realize I didn't know this.
And that's why the comment to do Torah exists in so many places. To further explain that, and it's very relevant to the very next paragraph we go into, you must run onto a scenario in many cases to reveal a new layer of question. But what was doing Torah that got you there? Living. There is an entire creation for you to live in, for you to walk, run, eat, see the sun, see the moon. All of it is doing Torah while not breaking these commandments, because you will be able to do Torah more through following these commandments. And so it is expected that you are going to have iterations and iterations where you did not appreciate a fine point because you hadn't lived that situation yet. And once you get there, it will come up again. This is why there's every year you read all the way through the Torah again, and you learn something new every year, no matter how many times you've read it.
Hashem is constantly refining us.
Go ahead.
Yes, to add to this, we're talking about living in the world and living according to the 7 laws. We always must remember that from the very beginning, when Adam, the first man to discover the Creator and to connect with Him, God spoke to him, and one of the main instructions, perhaps the first instruction, really his intent, was to place a particular kind of a creation, a man who could choose freely and connect with the Creator and not merely be a smart animal, but rise above that, connect with the Creator. And for what purpose? If we remember, in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, He placed man there to work it and to guard it. Now, there was a simple meaning according to the time when that happened. And when you learn Torah, the story is much broader and deeper than it seems at first blush. But the two mandates, to work and to guard, extends through the rest of humanity, working the active part, to do, and to guard, right, to protect against sin, against God's law. The working part, that is certainly where we have a free hand to build up the world how we should, to make it a better place. And if I may quote from Proverbs, that the fear of Hashem is the beginning of wisdom. We have intelligence. We can build it up. We've seen how the world has been built up. But only with a proper fear of Hashem can we build up the world properly in His image. And that comes through, I would say, through the aspect, through the mitzvah of din, of judgment, which in its simple meaning applies to the courts of justice, but it begins in the mind, using the God-given intelligence to discern and decide what is right, what is wrong, what is true, and what is false. And that is the whole point with detail, as you see. And we spent quite a lot of time on detail, but that is what we must do, and always do our best before our Maker. So continuing.
So I would like to make a suggestion. In the interest of time, what if we were to read the next 3 paragraphs, which is the remainder of this section, and then backtrack and discuss? Would that be okay?
Even if we do not have time to backtrack and discuss, I believe we could spend months on this very concept as it bridges into many.
Yeah.
I'm sure the book discusses much of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Shane.
Thank you. Thank you all. So, to this point, if you're not revealing the layers of understanding, let's talk about where the Noahide basis of knowledge has been before this book, for example. So, over many centuries.
So, okay.
Yes, I'm starting to read. Thank you for clarifying that. Even back to the paragraph. Over many centuries, the long and bitter conditions of exile, including the great social, philosophical, and spiritual revolutions that swept the world, not only had a marked effect on the way Torah is practiced and taught, but on what is practiced and taught. Some obligations were all but forgotten, particularly national obligations on the Jewish people as a whole. One such obligation was the spread of the observance of the 7 Noahide laws, that obligation being mentioned in the prior paragraph. To this point, just real quickly, as we just said, if you're not engaged in teaching the Noahide laws to the rest of the nations because you are, say, pulled from your country, thrown into another country, people are trying to get rid of your language and culture, you're spread from parts of Russia all the way through the United States, at one time or another, kicked out of countries, and have no governmental support for your way of life. You have to recreate it everywhere you go. It's hard to teach everybody around you the Noahide laws, so you don't get into a lot of the doing Torah that will reveal all the iterations you need to go through. So, thanks to Hashem, the miracles of the founding of the State of Israel, the ingathering of the exiles, and unprecedented Orthodox Jewish outreach to the secular Jewish masses have all brought about a great restoration of Torah observance. While the ranks of the mainstream Orthodox systems have swelled, smaller schools of thought have emerged as well, working to renew interest in fulfilling the national obligations of the Jewish people and to restore a truer, more authentic practice of Hashem's law. In this current expansive phase in the history of Jewish thought and practice, Torah outreach to non-Jews has experienced a rebirth. In the last, in the last 40 years, a number of pioneering efforts with many merits have been made in the field of Noahide education. However, until recently, non-Jews still lacked a clear authoritative legal guide. Left with little awareness of the true nature, breadth, and richness of the Torah's legal framework for non-Jews, much less how to study it, they continued to pursue any Torah learning they could find, be it Chabad-style Hasidism for Noahides or local Kabbalah classes.
Now, it's important to point out that so over the intervening centuries that the Jews have been in exile, they've basically been under continuous persecution and persecution and active, I guess, like basically all the Gentiles around them have been persecuting them and trying to kill them actively.
Basically, they've been in survival mode for about 2,500 years.
And when in that sort of situation, they're not necessarily under an obligation to share information about the 7 laws to the people who are actively trying to kill them. It's
nothing about the Torah tells you to be suicidal.
Be killed or keep your mouth shut and potentially live to preserve it for another day. The second option is preferable, and that's been the case through much of recent Jewish history, unfortunately.
Yeah, and something else, and hopefully may give some perspective here. When we see Jews in our time, certainly in the West, many Jews appear as we do, and they dress as we do, they speak our language and so forth, and we see that they go to synagogue, they have their holidays, but it seems they're really much like us, Americans or Europeans, who just practice a private religion and then pay their tax due to the state, and that's it. No, again, that is exile mode. Even in the wealthiest of living conditions, where they are privileged and they're given access to the civic arena and so on and so forth, still a state of exile. And that's been the case in past times. And they are unable, as long as they are in the state, they are unable to live as a nation. Remember what we read before. Hashem said that he wants to make of them a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, not a holy religion. That is why they've been returning to the land which he swore to their fathers, so that they can fully carry out the divine mandate in peace and be that light to the nations.
Well, also, our view as Americans is, we happen to live in a time and a place, sort of a bubble in history, where we have relative religious freedom. We permit that to others. We don't mind others being like somewhat different from, the normal fold of people. But that's unusual in history and in the world.
To make a certain point here, as Americans, we learned growing up in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Wow, that's great. Bring America to the Indians, and we learn all this guilt later about what was actually done to Indians. But aside from that, 1492 is a pretty landmark year. We're talking about a time when the king and queen, Ferdinand and Isabel, los Reyes Católicos, basically decreed, if you are Jewish, get out of Spain. Get out of our kingdom. I want you to imagine that for a moment.
Or convert.
We're not going to come up with bylaws to sort of force you out of here slowly, like it's illegal to write in anything but the king's script, or it's illegal to wear tefillin, those things hanging off your beards. You can't have a beard if you're a man. All these little, no. If you're Jewish, get out. If you just imagine.
You don't have to imagine too hard. You can go read modern accounts of all of the, go look at the Middle East. Why are there no Jews in any of the Arab countries, basically, currently? Because they were all expelled.
We have a tendency to project our own limits upon history and even present culture, to your point, Jacob, Arab nations, and just say, well, the world is this blank slate of normative behavior, so why are they complaining about this or doing this? No, well, let's go backwards. Actually, if you dare to seem as a Jewish person in any way, shape, or form, you're not allowed to be in Spain anymore. Imagine that being done here in the U.S. in any capacity. No attempt to legalize little pieces of behavior, just the identity in its entirety, outright. And as Jake points out, that point in history reveals to us a large separation between our concept of what's going on and a lot of realities, and those realities are continuing in other countries today.
I would like to point out though that despite this, I don't know what I just did. Oh, despite all these hardships and very extreme limitations for helping spread the Noahide laws, something amazing happened, and I don't know how, but somehow a lot of this stuff started to slowly seep into the laws of the nations. We have a strong aversion to murder in our time. It's not 100% yet, but there was a time in history where people killing other people was perfectly fine, right? And I know like some of the laws of the U.S. is based on people having studied Hebrew and the Mishnah Torah like hundreds of years ago. I know one of the more modern people is Ami Pelier. Jacob, you can kind of talk about that because you know more about him, but he studied with Rabbi Ben Amozig. He was probably one of the first, maybe the scratch on the surface for the modern Noahide movement, and this was like about 100 and some years ago, not even 100 years ago.
Yeah, I guess what the modern Noahide movement, as we think of it today, probably really began about 200 to 300 years ago, with rabbis in Holland, essentially, who had a huge effect on a lot of thinkers of the Enlightenment that were based largely in England, and people like John Selden and Hugo Grotius, and a lot of the founders of what we know today as like the movements towards liberty and enlightenment were actually almost directly affected by knowledge of the 7 laws of Noah and of Torah. And even people like Newton and other thinkers of the time were heavily affected by Torah concepts. And that has started a process, it seems, that is revolutionizing still, even today, much thought in the world. And not only that, but the reestablishment of the State of Israel, the security that they are now experiencing, relative, they still have a lot of issues to work through, but the situation today is allowing the Jewish people to start to become a nation again, the nation of Israel, and to start to be able to fulfill their role in becoming a light to the nations. I know. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question here. On the point that we're discussing, and becoming a state of Israel again is, of course, referring back to I know there's a kingdom of Israel, a kingdom of Yehudah, and the temples were established. As Maury pointed out in the book, Noahide law is experiencing a rebirth. Now, I think in our next session, much of Maury's writing will cover the recent modern Noahide outreach, but when it's called a rebirth, is there any information about the birth or the origin, whether it's going straight back to mentioning Torah itself and references in there, or a little bit of history around sort of Noahide or observant movements earlier, before the destruction of the temples and breaking up of Israel?
Yeah, the whole idea of like a Noahide and people following the 7 laws of Noah is very, very ancient. It's not some new concept. It's not something that developed recently. This is an idea that's, it's found in the Torah itself, with people like Yithro, and everyone before Har Sinai was a Noahide, basically. It's all over there. Like, you got to ask yourself. So it says about Avraham in the Torah. So a lot of people will say, well, the Torah doesn't talk about Noahides, and it doesn't directly mention the 7 laws. The rabbis are just making this nonsense up, right? No. Look in the Torah, and unfortunately I don't have the direct reference, but it says explicitly about Avraham that he followed my commandments, right? Now, Avraham lived hundreds of years before Har Sinai, before Mount Sinai, and the giving of the Torah. So what commandments did Avraham follow from Hashem?
Oh, be clean, be a nice boy. Show up, say hi to your mother.
No,
good job.
Is a direct reference. It says he followed my mitzvot. This is a direct reference to the 7 laws of Noah, right there. And it's in the Torah itself. And so everyone, from that point who followed Hashem, this is what they did. This is how they lived.
If I'm quote the verse quickly.
Oh yeah, please.
This is found in Bereshith, or in Genesis, in chapter 18, where it says here, chapter 18, verse 19, where Hashem himself, he says, "For I have loved him," as Abraham, "because he commands his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of Hashem, doing charity and justice, in order that Hashem might then bring upon Abraham that which he had spoken to him." So there are 3 things here.
That's not the verse I was referring to at all.
Okay. Well, this is what came to mind, but it's still worthwhile because it shows here that Hashem actually has some kind of a Torah in mind, even before you get the Torah as we know it at Sinai.
Well, maybe, Jacob, you can find your reference for our next time we get together to continue our study here.
Bereshith 26:5.
Yes, you were reading the wrong positive statement about this guy who was not Jewish. As it turns out, there's several in the Torah, which should be enough to indicate to you you don't have to be Jewish. There are laws for other people. However, since that wasn't specific enough, Jacob will go into it.
The maximum speed limit for Noahides is 55 miles per hour. They must not buy beer on Sundays.
To continue on this point, though, there have been lots of other Noahides throughout the ages too. There have been, we know of non-Jews in the Second Temple period.
Well, Maury talked in his class recently about the Kenites.
Yeah, there's the Kenites that are mentioned in the Tanakh.
They're the descendants of Yithro.
Yeah. Yithro himself, obviously,
Yeah.
who didn't convert.
As Andy was mentioning,
the Roman period.
as Andy was mentioning in his reading, there was an entire household under Abraham. I think Andy may have been getting to that point that maybe they didn't stick around, but there was an entire household that was not even related in some cases to Abraham. They were all, what would they be? What would you call them?
Well, really, these may seem like small, isolated instances, certainly worthy of noting and keeping of memory. And it was, of all the people, Abraham's progeny who kept this tradition even until this day. And really, the whole process of history, from that time, we still see God's hand in this, mysterious as it is. You have the two so-called Abrahamic religions, Christianity on one side, Islam on the other. One is Avodah Zarah, that is idolatry, that's Christianity. Islam denies Torah. However, even through these, many of the nations have learned about a God such as the God of Israel and learned about the way that he orders the world, commands justice, and even extends compassion. And through Hashem's patience, there has been this slow evolutionary and even revolutionary process until we have stripped away a lot of the layers of idolatry and lies that we inherited till we come to this place to this day. And what a time to live. What a time to live in this day when much of the world is no longer isolated, but very global. And I feel very optimistic, and I think the rest of my friends do, many people do, is ultimately heading toward an ultimate awareness of God on a global scale.
I think this may be a good point to kind of wrap up and let our friends go hear from the video. But any last one-line word or comment? I know we can start back. The next time we meet up, we'll start back where we left off with this discussion and continue reading. But any last thoughts, comments?
No Inuit tribesmen were harmed in the filming of this video. I just want to make that clear. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. All right. Well, in that case, if nobody has anything else to say, I'd like to thank our friends who watched this video for joining us for our first ever guide for the Noahide study session. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments about anything we read or said during this video, please write them in the video comment section and we will look those up and respond to them. And we hope to see you again next time. Thanks.
Thank you.